At first glance, the governor of the Theban province also appeared loyal to the Heracleopolitan rulers. Intef the Great of Thebes, a contemporary of Antifi, openly declared himself a devoted servant of the king. He even allowed Thebes to be represented at a major gathering of provincial governors, likely organized by the Heracleopolitan leadership in response to Antifi's aggressive military actions. However, it's telling that Intef did not attend in person. By taking part without personally showing up, Intef sent a deliberate and strategic message to both the king and his fellow governors. He was a powerful leader with a formidable private army and had more important matters to attend to than sitting in council with other regional officials. While pledges of loyalty were easy to make, they didn't reflect the true state of affairs. In reality, Intef was deeply involved in consolidating Theban power and positioning the city as the center of a greater coalition. A clear indicator of his ambitions was his decision to adopt the title Great Overlord of Upper Egypt, extending his claim beyond just Thebes. At least one province understood the implications and chose to support Intef, acknowledging his rising authority in the region. This defection was a significant setback for the Heracleopolitan regime. Since the ascent of the Kadi dynasty, Unit had been a loyal supporter, with its governor maintaining not just local allegiance but also influence over two neighboring regions. Now, with Thebes gaining momentum, the Heracleopolitans faced the potential loss of their entire southern territory. Their countermeasure was both political and provocative. They appointed a loyalist governor in Jebtu, the province strategically located between Thebes to the south and Unit to the north. Realistically, their best option was to monitor Theban ambitions closely. The newly appointed governor, User, understood the weight of his mission and chose to relocate his administrative center from the traditional capital at Jebtu to Yashinshin, modern-day Kozum, situated right on the border with Thebes. From there, he could quite literally keep watch over Theban activities. Jebtu held tremendous strategic value. It served as the entrance to the eastern desert, while its leaders also oversaw key routes through the western desert. These paths connected to Saharan oases, departing from the Nile's west bank directly across from Yashinshin. User and his royal backers were well aware that Thebes had already established a military foothold in the western desert, having contributed troops to a desert garrison during the campaign against Antifi. Preventing Theban expansion in this region became crucial. If Thebes ever secured full control of the western desert routes, its rulers could circumvent any opposition along the Nile and gain direct access to the sacred city of Abydos. Such a development would mark a devastating blow to the Kadi dynasty, likely signaling the beginning of its downfall. As always, Intef of Thebes responded to unfolding events with a strategic piece of propaganda. To signal his intentions, he added yet another title to his growing list of self-styled honors. By proclaiming himself the confidant of the king in the narrow door of the southern desert, he directly contested User's position as overseer of the eastern and western deserts. The fragile alliance between Thebes and Jebtu, long based on mutual convenience, was officially over. In its place, open rivalry emerged, as both provinces competed for dominance over the crucial desert trade and military routes. It didn't take long for this contest of rhetoric to escalate into armed conflict. Thebes launched a cross-border assault, laying waste to the town of Yashinshin. Jebtu responded fiercely, driving out the attackers and taking some of them prisoner. In the aftermath, the chief priest of Jebtu ordered Yashinshin rebuilt. But it was clear to all that this was merely the opening move in a larger and prolonged struggle driven by Theban ambition. The people of Jebtu braced themselves for the inevitable continuation of hostilities. Among the captured were Nubian mercenaries from Medja and Wawat, serving within the Theban ranks. Since Egypt's early campaigns against desert tribes during the 6th dynasty, Nubians had been an integral part of Egypt's military forces. For many young Nubians, military service offered an opportunity for wealth and honor far beyond what was available in their homeland. Much like the modern case of Nepalese Gurkhas in the British Army, Nubians found service in foreign armies a path to distinction. While many factions during the first intermediate period employed Nubian soldiers, it was the Thebans who most fully integrated them into their offensive operations. They even established a colony of Nubian troops at Inerti, on the southern edge of their territory. Though they adopted Egyptian burial customs, they preserved a strong cultural identity. Their ethnicity, rather than being a barrier, became a symbol of valor. In times of war, societal prejudices began to weaken, and Egyptian society itself started to change in surprising ways from within. In this volatile climate, a leader emerged to match the moment. User's successor in Jebtu, Djati, proved to be as determined and loyal a provincial governor as the Heracleopolitan court could have hoped for. His efforts to resist Theban expansion only came to light in recent times, thanks to an inscription found on a cliff in the western desert. It details his courageous efforts to keep the desert routes open for Heracleopolitan forces and his firm stance against Thebes. Djati took on the title the confidant of the king in the door of the Upper Egyptian desert, a direct rebuttal to Intef's earlier claim. Both sides understood the high stakes. The western desert routes across the Cana Bend held the key to strategic dominance. If Thebes controlled them, it would threaten Abydos and all of Middle Egypt. If Heracleopolis held them, the western districts of Thebes would be left exposed. The situation turned dire for Jebtu when Intef the Great's successor captured a significant mountain overlooking the primary desert road, cutting off vital access. Djati's response was swift and innovative. He built an alternate road slightly north of the original, ensuring that its eastern end remained safely within Jebtu's borders. In his own words, he explained, "I have done this in order to cross this hill country that the ruler of another province sealed." However, his triumph was short-lived. Ironically, the very road he had constructed became the reason for his downfall. Close to his commemorative inscription lies another, much shorter one, stating only, "the son of Ra, Intef." This brief note marks the Theban capture of the new route, likely carried out through a quick strike launched from one of their desert outposts. With Jebtu's grip on the western desert broken, there was nothing left to prevent Theban forces from advancing toward Abydos, the sacred burial ground of kings and the administrative heart of Upper Egypt. The new title adopted by Intef was deeply symbolic. Unlike the governors before him, he was no longer satisfied with a regional or provincial role. He now sought to claim full kingship. By adopting a royal title associated with divine rule, Intef issued an unmistakable challenge to the Kadi dynasty. His ambition was clear: the throne of Horus itself. Though the Thebans exuded confidence, their adversaries had no intention of relinquishing the throne without resistance. Once officially ignited, the Egyptian civil war endured for over a century, shaping the lives of 4 generations. The warlike spirit of the period is vividly reflected in its monuments. Tombs frequently depict soldiers, stelae often show individuals holding bows and arrows, and grave goods regularly include actual weaponry. Egyptian society had never before been so thoroughly immersed in military culture. What makes this conflict particularly distinctive is the survival of numerous commemorative inscriptions from both factions. These texts enable historians to trace the ebb and flow of the war, capturing both victories and defeats on either side. The initial breakthrough appears to have been made by the first king Intef, whose most significant success was likely his control of the desert routes across the Cana Bend. Although his reign lasted little more than 10 years, he achieved a critical strategic gain that paved the way for Theban territorial growth. His son and heir, Intef II, quickly carried forward his father's mission, intensifying the military campaign. His leadership and charisma won deep loyalty among his commanders. One follower, Heni, proudly claimed to have remained by his king's side day and night. Before Thebes could challenge the loyalist strongholds north of Abydos, it needed to secure its position in the south. Therefore, the initial objective was to bring Ankhtifi's former stronghold firmly under Theban control. Whether during the last years of Ankhtifi's life or soon after his death, the local people recognized the changing tide and aligned themselves with Thebes. Ongoing famine and general hardship likely played a role in this shift, as the population hoped for greater stability under Intef II's rule. Simultaneously, Thebes expanded its reach northward, taking control of 3 adjacent provinces, Jebtu, Unit, and Hutsekum. By doing so, Intef II fulfilled the ambition first voiced by his grandfather, Intef the Great, becoming the undisputed overlord of Upper Egypt. His authority was acknowledged across the entire southern region, stretching from Abu to the outskirts of Abydos. By the midpoint of Intef-II's reign, around 2045 BC, Thebes' northern border had advanced to the doorstep of Abydos. Tar, also known as the province of Chini, now marked the front lines of the civil war. The desert routes connecting Thebes and Abydos finally came into strategic prominence. One loyal Theban records an expedition that marched in the dust to launch an attack on Tar, while another describes the resulting battle and the removal of the loyalist governor. I descended upon Abydos, which was under the control of a rebel. I drove him back to his own territory from the midst of the city. The shift in language is telling. The Thebans were no longer presenting themselves as rivals but as restorers of order. By portraying the Heracleopolitan rulers as mere rebels, Theban propaganda reframed their expansion as a righteous mission to re-establish legitimate authority. Framing power as religious or moral duty was a hallmark of Egyptian statecraft. To solidify their hold on the region, the Thebans imposed taxes across Tar and redirected the revenue to their own capital. Encouraged by this victory, Intef-II then turned his attention southward. Using his control of Abu as a launching point, he extended Egyptian influence into Lower Nubia, reasserting dominance over the lands beyond the First Cataract for the first time in more than 100 years. The momentum of Theban conquest appeared unstoppable. However, events often take an unexpected turn against those who believe themselves unbeatable. In Middle Egypt, at Saudi, a family of nomarchs with especially strong ties to the Heracleopolitan rulers took up the loyalist cause to resist the rising power of Thebes. Before the civil war began, Saudi had been governed by a man named Kati, named in honor of the king. Raised within the royal court, Kati had been educated alongside the king's children and even shared swimming lessons with them. Upon reaching high office, he dedicated himself to improving conditions for his people, commissioning extensive irrigation projects across his province to mitigate the harsh effects of famine. An inscription in his tomb reads, "I released the floodwaters upon the ancient mounds. Everyone who thirsted had inundation to their heart's content. I provided water for the neighbors so that they lived in harmony." Kati's successor, Itaby, now faced an even greater threat, Theban aggression. Determined to overcome this challenge, he launched a fierce counteroffensive in response to Intef-II's raid on Abydos. This counterattack succeeded in regaining control over Tar, but at a terrible price. Such sacrilege was a severe stain on the legitimacy of kingship and an offense against the gods, for which the Heracleopolitan ruler would later express deep remorse. In hindsight, this event was viewed as the turning point that ultimately favored Thebes. Yet, in the short term, Itaby's forces claimed victory. When the Thebans attempted retaliation, they were repelled. This second triumph emboldened Itaby to send a direct threat to the southern provinces, warning of further military action unless the rebellious territories returned to loyalist control. Itaby's own autobiography recounts these events, but the section containing his challenge to the southern nomes was later covered over. This act was likely meant to conceal the message and protect the citizens of Saudi from Theban reprisals for harboring such a staunch enemy. Whether this historical alteration was ordered by Itaby himself or his descendants remains unclear, but it suggests that not long after his celebrated victories, the tide of war shifted once again in favor of Thebes. This reversal owed much to Intef-II's military genius. He quickly recognized that attempting to seize and hold Abydos via Tar risked bogging down his forces indefinitely, giving the Heracleopolitans time to regroup and strengthen. A bold and risky flanking maneuver was the only way to break the deadlock. By isolating Tar from the rest of the Heracleopolitan kingdom, it would become far easier to subdue. During the final decade of his long 50-year reign, Intef-II executed this strategy. Commanding the desert routes, he advanced around Tar and established a new defensive stronghold 2 provinces to the north. Cut off from support, both Chini and Abydos fell quickly to his forces. To celebrate his triumph, Intef sent a letter to his rival in Heracleopolis, accusing King Kati of having stirred conflict over Tar. The message was unmistakable. By failing to protect the sacred sites of Abydos, Kati had lost his claim to the throne. In contrast, Intef was determined to prove himself not only as a formidable warrior, but also as a just and compassionate ruler. Fierce on the battlefield yet generous in victory, he sought to win the loyalty of his people by distributing food aid throughout the 10 provinces under his control. One of his close aides even described him as a great provider for the homeland during difficult times. While such declarations served a clear psychological purpose, Intef's devotion to his people and gods appears sincere. His impressive funerary stela, found in his rock-cut tomb at Thebes, is remarkable not for chronicling his military achievements but for its profound hymn to the sun god Ra and to Hathor, the guardian goddess believed to dwell in the hills around Thebes. The verses reveal a glimpse of human vulnerability and a fear of death beneath the exterior of a great warrior. Entrust me to the evening hours. May they offer protection. Entrust me to the early morning. May it surround me with safety. I am nurtured by the morning light. I am nurtured by the evening's calm. The death of a king was always a time of great concern. This anxiety must have been even more intense for the people of Thebes when the departing monarch was a war hero of Intef II's stature. Yet, a rare first-hand account of the succession, recorded by the king's treasurer Chetji, suggests the transition was peaceful and orderly. The dual king, son of Ra, Intef, who lives eternally like Ra, departed serenely to his horizon. When his son took his place, I followed him. However, Intef III, the new ruler, reigned for only a brief 8 years. Under his leadership, Theban control over the desert regions secured tribute from the rulers of the Red Land, the desert chiefs, and the long famine that had afflicted Upper Egypt for over 50 years finally came to an end. Though the economy improved, the war effort lost momentum. A fragile truce appeared to settle across the battlefield. Theban authority was absolute in the 8 southernmost provinces, while Heracleopolitan control over Middle and Lower Egypt remained unchallenged. This balance might have persisted, if not for a fundamental principle in ancient Egyptian belief: a divided kingdom was unacceptable. Any legitimate ruler had to be lord of the 2 lands, not merely a regional power. The final showdown arrived quickly. Intef III was succeeded by a young and energetic ruler who had inherited his grandfather's strategic brilliance and unwavering resolve. This new king, Mentuhotep II, was named after Montu, the Theban god of war, and was determined to live up to this powerful association. His Horus name, Sankibdui, meaning the one who brings life to the heart of the 2 lands, clearly expressed his chief ambition, the reunification of Egypt. Mentuhotep benefited greatly from turmoil within the enemy's core territory. The newly appointed nomarch of Saudi, Kadi II, faced significant resistance in his own province. It required the intervention of the crown and the personal presence of the Heracleopolitan king Merakara to secure his position. Meanwhile, the people of Saudi began to seriously contemplate the possibility of switching allegiance to the Thebans. In an effort to assert his authority both over the Thebans and his own restless subjects, Kadi II led a large fleet southward in a show of force. Then, during Mentuhotep's 14th year on the throne, Tar rose in rebellion once again. This proved to be the last straw. The Theban army surged north, crushing Tar and advancing into the heart of Heracleopolitan territory. Saudi was defeated, and its nomarch was removed from power. Now, nothing barred the Thebans from capturing their ultimate goal, Heracleopolis itself. When Mentuhotep's forces reached the capital of the House of Kadi, they unleashed their fury by burning and destroying tombs in the city's cemetery. To emphasize their victory, the Theban king immediately installed one of his most trusted officials as his personal representative in Heracleopolis, entrusting him with control of the city's most critical institution. This harsh fate awaited any rebel who survived the battlefield only to fall into Theban hands. Mentuhotep's harsh treatment of his enemies extended far beyond Heracleopolis. In the rebellious province of Tar, he appointed an overseer of constabulary on water and on land, signaling a crackdown on lawlessness in this unruly region. Another loyalist proudly claimed responsibility for collecting taxes from Tar, Tshini, and even as far north as the back part of the 10th Upper Egyptian province. Heracleopolitan supporters attempting to evade punishment by fleeing to the desert oases were relentlessly pursued, unaware of the Thebans' mastery of desert routes. The king himself encouraged his victorious troops to chase down troublemakers and proceeded to annex the Oases and Lower Nubia. A garrison station at the fortress in Abu provided a strategic base for campaigns against Wawat, while expeditions into the western desert effectively disrupted enemy supply lines and eliminated remaining pockets of resistance. With his external borders firmly secured, the king was able to focus on internal governance. Thebes, located on the east bank of the Nile at a key junction where desert routes from both east and west converged, had first gained importance toward the end of the Old Kingdom. Its excellent communication links made it a natural choice to serve as the capital of all Upper Egypt. The city's prominence had only grown stronger due to the pivotal role played by its leading family during the recent civil war. At this time, Thebes was still relatively small, enclosed by a thick mud brick wall. Its streets were tightly packed with houses, granaries, offices, and workshops arranged in a grid pattern surrounding the modest temple of the god Ammonius-Ra at Ipitsut, present-day Karnak. Like any provincial capital, Thebes had its own local government, headed by a mayor who was supported by officials overseeing critical functions such as land registration, irrigation and flood control, and tax collection. As an important commercial hub, the riverfront quays bustled with merchants unloading goods for sale to both government officials and private buyers. The city's narrow streets echoed with the activity of potters, carpenters, weavers, tanners, butchers, bakers, and brewers. Most residents were peasant farmers living in simple mud brick homes, working the fields daily as their ancestors had for generations. However, Thebes also hosted a growing number of wealthier families. Had Thebes remained an ordinary provincial center, the ambitions of its inhabitants might have been limited. But with the city's rise to national prominence, new opportunities for social advancement flourished. Prosperity had arrived. Under Mentuhotep, Thebes was officially established as the dynastic capital, with prominent local figures appointed to key state positions. Administrative reforms soon gave way to significant religious changes. To signify the final chapter of the civil war, the king altered his Horus name to Nedjeri-Hejet, meaning divine of the white crown. He launched an ambitious campaign of self-promotion and self-deification, aimed at restoring and strengthening the ideology of divine kingship that had suffered during the years of internal conflict. From Abydos and Unit to Nekheb and Abu, Mentuhotep commissioned a series of elaborate cult structures, frequently dedicated to himself as the chosen one of the gods. At Unit, he took on the unprecedented title of the living god, foremost of kings. The practice of elevating a reigning king to divine status during his lifetime represented a bold and new chapter in royal ideology. Mentuhotep clearly was a ruler who embraced no half measures. Mentuhotep also used his monuments to deliver a clear political warning to any remaining rebels in Egypt's northern provinces. His chapel at Unit depicted him in the traditional pose of striking down an enemy, but the defeated figure was symbolized by two entwined papyrus stems, representing Lower Egypt. An inscription reinforced this message, adding the marshlands to the usual list of Egypt's foes. An even more explicit relief from Mentuhotep's shrine at Inerti, located in his Theban homeland, showed 4 captives kneeling, awaiting their grim fate of being clubbed to death by the king. Leading this group was not the expected Nubian, Asiatic, or Libyan, but an Egyptian, a representative of the chiefs of the two lands. For Mentuhotep, securing the nation began with control at home. After years of warfare and paramilitary actions aimed at eliminating all opposition, Mentuhotep was confident enough to proclaim his uncontested rule over a reunified Egypt. Following Egyptian tradition, he adopted a new title, Semitoi, meaning the one who unites the two lands. The era of internal division and factional strife was now consigned to the past. Egypt could once again hold its head high as a united and peaceful nation, governed by a divine king. Thus began the Middle Kingdom. Mentuhotep's enduring legacy embodies his resolve to revive the royal cult and present himself as the monarch who restored the dignity of kingship. In a natural hollow within the hills west of Thebes, he commissioned a grand funerary monument. True to his role as reunifier and Renaissance ruler, the design blended traditional and innovative elements, merging features from the Theban tombs of his predecessors with the pyramids of the Old Kingdom's Memphis region. The decoration included battle scenes alongside classic royal imagery. Surrounding the royal tomb, graves were prepared for the king's closest advisors and most loyal officers. This arrangement deliberately echoed the great court cemetery of the 4th dynasty at Giza, where courtiers were laid to rest near their monarch, just as they had stood by him in life. Perhaps the most striking element of the entire mortuary complex was a simple, undecorated pit carved into the rock within sight of the king's grand tomb. This was among the first features completed, containing the linen-wrapped bodies of 60 or more men stacked atop one another. These were strong, tall men, averaging about 5 feet 9.5 inches in height and between 30 and 40 years old. Despite their physical strength, they all met the same fate. Most bore wounds caused by arrows and blunt force trauma from heavy objects falling from great heights. These men had been soldiers killed during an assault on a fortified town. Some showed scars marking them as experienced veterans, but their final challenge was not close combat, it was siege warfare. Arrows and missiles rained down from battlements, killing many outright despite their tightly curled hair offering little protection. Others, wounded but alive, were mercilessly finished off on the battlefield by blows to the skull with clubs. Their bodies lay abandoned to scavenging vultures until the battle was won and the town taken. Only then did the survivors gather the dead, remove their blood-soaked clothing, clean the bodies with sand, and wrap them carefully in linen to prepare them for burial. There was no attempt to mummify these soldiers, and little distinction was made between ranks. The 2 officers received somewhat more thorough bandaging and were placed in plain, undecorated coffins. Before burial, their names were inscribed in ink on the linen wrappings, typical Theban names like Ameni, Mentuhotep, and Indefikar, familial names such as Senbabi and Saipu, and names like Sokotep, Sobanakt, and Sahipibsobek, suggesting origins near the northern cult centers dedicated to the crocodile god Sobek. It is likely these fallen soldiers had taken part in the decisive battle of the Civil War. Some may have been locals who sided with the Theban army against their own rulers, thus earning special honor. For King Mentuhotep, conqueror of the Heracleopolitans and reunifier of Egypt, building this national war memorial near his own tomb was a masterstroke of propaganda. It stood as a powerful reminder to his contemporaries and future generations of the sacrifices made by Thebes during the conflict. It ensured Mentuhotep would be remembered as a great military leader. Moreover, anticipating the approach of his successors, it helped cement the myth of the king and his loyal followers as the nation's defenders. This war cemetery also foreshadowed a broader cultural shift. In the emerging Middle Kingdom, a heroic death in battle would come to serve for many as a worthy substitute for the pleasures of life itself. Ancient Egypt appears to have been a civilization deeply fixated on death. From the construction of pyramids to the practice of mummification, much of what defines Egyptian culture centers around funerary traditions. However, a closer examination reveals that the Egyptians were not obsessed with death itself, but rather with the methods of overcoming it. Pyramids served as resurrection devices for the pharaohs, while mummies were crafted to house the eternal spirits of the deceased. The prominence of burial practices and grave goods in modern perceptions of ancient Egypt likely results from cemeteries located at the desert's edge surviving better than the towns and villages on the floodplain. Tombs have provided archaeologists with rich and relatively accessible finds, whereas excavating ancient settlements remains challenging, painstaking, and less glamorous. Nevertheless, the significance of beliefs about the afterlife and related customs in ancient Egypt cannot be dismissed as merely a result of archaeological preservation. Proper preparation for the world beyond was considered vital to prevent death from resulting in total obliteration. Although hope for an afterlife and the necessary preparations for it date back to Egypt's earliest prehistoric cultures, the period of political turmoil lasting from approximately 2175 to 1970 BC after the fall of the Old Kingdom marked a turning point in the evolution of Egyptian funerary religion. Many core beliefs and practices that endured until the end of pharaonic times were forged during this era of civil war and social upheaval. The weakening of the monarchy affected all social classes to varying degrees. For most of the population, the presence or absence of a strong government made little difference in their daily routines. Their long days of planting, weeding, tending, and harvesting continued with the same predictability as the sunrise. However, the collapse of central authority had severe long-term consequences for ordinary people and their families. The lack of effective government allowed corrupt local officials to impose harsh taxes. Neglected irrigation and flood control systems increased the risk of poor harvests and famine. The state's failure to maintain grain reserves deprived farmers of their only safety net. It is no surprise that contemporary accounts from the century following the death of Pepi II describe widespread hunger. For the small literate elite at the top of society, the political crisis may have been less immediately life-threatening but more enduring in its impact. Senior officials could expect to be fed but not to advance their careers. When the source of honor dried up, positions earned through loyal service to the ruler stagnated. Powerful local families, stripped of royal patronage and authority, often chose to govern their communities independently, accumulating many royal privileges for themselves. As old certainties disappeared, so too did the clear distinctions between royal and private provisions that had defined the Pyramid Age. With life growing increasingly difficult and uncertain, the need for assurance beyond death became more urgent. If necessity is the mother of invention, then the harsh realities of post-6th dynasty Egypt created fertile ground for theological innovation. During more stable and prosperous times, as far as we can judge from tombs and grave goods, the ruling class had been content with an afterlife that essentially continued earthly life but without its unpleasant aspects. The richly decorated tomb chapels of the Pyramid Age reflect an era of certainty and a materialistic view of life after death. The primary purpose of tomb decoration, and of the tomb itself, was to ensure the deceased had all the material comforts they needed for the next world. Scenes of busy bakers, brewers, potters, carpenters, metalworkers, fishermen hauling in large catches, and offering bearers presenting meat, poultry, fine furniture, and luxury goods were all meant to guarantee an endless supply of food, drink, and other necessities to support the tomb owner in a very earthly afterlife. While the king might hope to join the stars and become one with cosmic forces after death, this destiny was denied even to his highest officials. In life and death, one rule applied to the king and another to his subjects. These strict social divisions gradually weakened and eventually disappeared as royal power declined during the long reign of Pepi II and the ensuing turmoil. Concepts of a transcendent afterlife among the gods spread through the population, transforming funerary practices and broader culture. Earthly success and being remembered well after death were no longer sufficient. Instead, the hope for something greater in the next world became paramount. Ideas about what awaited beyond death were developed, systematized, and creatively combined into elaborate beliefs. The ancient Egyptians introduced key notions such as original sin, an underworld filled with dangers and demons, a final judgment before the great God, and the promise of a glorious resurrection. These ideas would resonate through subsequent civilizations and eventually influence the Judeo-Christian tradition. During the era of the great pyramid builders, resurrection in any meaningful sense was reserved solely for the king and depended on his attainment of divine status. Only the king, regarded as the earthly embodiment of the sky god Horus and the son of the sun, had enough influence, knowledge, and rank to enter the celestial realm. The first signs of this exclusive royal privilege beginning to weaken appeared during the reign of Pepi II. Interestingly, this erosion started within the royal family itself. Pepi's half-sister, Neith, had a small pyramid of her own, inscribed with spells that had previously been reserved only for the king. This subtle break from tradition soon had wider repercussions throughout Egyptian society. In the distant Dakhla oasis, far from the royal court where breaches in protocol might go unnoticed, the governor Medinefar was buried with protective funerary spells taken from the pyramid texts. A generation later, another official went even further, decorating his burial chamber with the very collection of spells used in Una's pyramid. Before long, even minor provincial officials were having wooden coffins inscribed with excerpts from the pyramid texts and new compositions. It is hard to determine exactly how Pepi II's successors dealt with this significant social and religious shift. Apart from King Ibi's small pyramid at Saqqara, the tombs of the 8th dynasty and the Heracleopolitan rulers have yet to be found. Most likely, These monuments included new ways to emphasize the royal status of their owners compared to common people. Nevertheless, the adoption of royal texts and imagery by ordinary citizens marked a fundamental change in the structure of ancient Egyptian society. A clear and ancient divide between the king and his subjects was shattered once and for all. Now, every Egyptian could aspire to divine status in the afterlife and to spend eternity among the gods. At the same time, this blending of royal and private spheres ironically reinforced the king's unique position. Images of royal symbols painted inside private coffins allowed their owners to achieve divinity and resurrection after death. During a time of political fragmentation and civil conflict, it may have comforted people to believe that divine kingship remained alive and active, influencing their ultimate fate for the better. This so-called democratization of the afterlife was far from truly democratic, reflecting a distinctly ancient Egyptian transformation. Equally significant as the broadening access to the afterlife was the transformation in how the afterlife itself was imagined. While many of the pyramid texts emphasized the ancient belief in the king's journey to the stars and his destiny among the indestructibles, some spells introduced a newer idea. This ancient earth god, both revered and feared as the ruler of the underworld, symbolized victory over the decay brought by death and offered the promise of resurrection not only for the king but eventually for ordinary people as well. Eternal life could be sought not only in the unchanging cycles of the cosmos but also through the nourishment provided by the earth. Osiris became the protector of the dead, and his underworld kingdom soon became the preferred destination for the afterlife journey, gradually replacing the celestial realm. The widespread desire to be identified with Osiris after death led to significant, visible changes in burial practices. From the earliest days of mummification, the goal had been to preserve the deceased's body in a recognizable form. By wrapping individual limbs, fingers, and toes separately, and shaping the facial features with linen bandages, a somewhat lifelike appearance was achieved. However, with the deceased now aspiring to be transformed into Osiris, maintaining human features became less important. Instead, the body was enveloped completely in a single shroud of bandages, creating the classic mummy form. This external appearance of transformation was enough to evoke the desired associations, so even the mummification process itself was sometimes shortened or simplified. As a result, many Middle Kingdom mummies are poorly preserved beneath their wrappings. Occasionally, the brain was left inside the skull, or internal organs were not removed, leading to decomposition. Insufficient drying or limited use of costly embalming oils also caused rapid decay of soft tissues. Yet, as religious concerns took precedence over material preservation, a fully intact body was less important than securing safe passage to the underworld. Being wrapped to resemble Osiris was considered an effective first step. Conquering death, securing a successful resurrection, and navigating the many perils of the underworld demanded potent magic, which is where texts and images played a crucial role. During the Old Kingdom, essential spells and illustrations were carved or painted on the walls of royal and private tombs, specifically within the burial chambers and chapels. However, after the death of Pepi II, the decline of royal workshops led to the gradual disappearance of these artistic traditions, making tomb decoration increasingly rare due to a shortage of skilled artisans. In their place, detailed wooden models became common. For modern researchers, these miniature models provide invaluable insight into ancient technologies, but for the Egyptians, they represented a humble replacement for the once elaborate painted scenes in a period marked by cultural decline. With decorated tombs becoming scarce, coffins themselves turned into focal points for decoration and became the canvas for magical spells intended to aid the deceased in the afterlife. To facilitate resurrection, the mummified body was positioned lying on its side, facing east towards the rising sun. On the eastern side of the coffin, a pair of magical eyes were painted, carefully aligned with the mummy's face, allowing the deceased to gaze toward the sunrise and the realm of the living. These eyes mimicked the facial markings of a falcon, granting the deceased the all-seeing vision of Horus. Through this rich symbolism, the dead individual was linked to Osiris, lord of the underworld, and was supported by Ra and Horus, the two most powerful gods of the sky. Thus, safely enclosed within the coffin and revitalized by the sun's rays, the transformed mummy embarked on its journey into the afterlife. In line with typical Egyptian beliefs, two distinct paths to paradise were imagined. These were detailed in the Book of Two Ways, the earliest known Egyptian afterlife text. This compilation of coffin texts presents two different destinies, reflecting two competing traditions that had already appeared in the Old Kingdom's pyramid texts. One option was a celestial afterlife alongside the sun god, now accessible to everyone. In this version of paradise, the deceased soul, depicted as a human-headed bird, would leave the coffin and soar from the tomb into the heavens. Each night, as the sun descended into the underworld, the soul would return to the mummy for protection. This concept of the soul, or ba, perfectly exemplifies the ancient Egyptians' intricate theological creativity. Seen as the individual's personality, the ba functioned as an alter ego during life but gained full significance after death, enabling the deceased to participate in the solar cycle. However, for the soul to be reborn each morning, it had to reunite each night with Osiris. The ba had a counterpart known as the ka, an eternal spirit that depended on food and drink for survival. Through the ka, the deceased could undertake an alternate route. From the land of life, the departed embarked on an epic voyage toward their final goal, the field of offering. The Egyptians believed this mythical land was situated near the eastern horizon, where the sun rises. Though part of the underworld, the field of offering symbolized the promise of rebirth. As the ka traveled from west to east, it mirrored the sun's nightly passage through darkness and participated in its daily renewal. However, this journey was perilous. According to the coffin texts, travelers faced numerous challenges: gates to pass through, waterways to cross, demons to appease, and secret knowledge to master. In one instance, the dead had to understand the parts of a ship to earn a place on the sun god's bark. Magical spells provided the necessary power to overcome these obstacles, and some coffins were even adorned internally with detailed maps of the underworld, illustrating seas, islands, rivers, and settlements along the route to the field of offering. The vivid descriptions of the dangers between death and salvation evoke a nightmarish vision akin to Hieronymus Bosch's Hell's Capes, reflecting a universal dread of death and a fervent hope for eternal life. The Egyptians feared not only basic human sufferings like thirst and starvation but also bizarre horrors. The coffin texts reveal the intense creativity of the ancient imagination. Despite these hardships, the ultimate reward was well worth the trials. The Egyptians pictured Osiris's domain as an idyllic paradise. Upon reaching this final destination, the deceased could expect an afterlife full of contentment. "I shall eat in it, and I shall wander in it. I shall plow in it, and I shall reap in it. I shall have sex in it, and I shall be content in it." It was an afterlife truly worth striving for. Osiris, the god presiding over this agricultural paradise, stood as the symbol of resurrection and the ultimate source of eternal life. By successfully overcoming the challenges and joining Osiris, the deceased secured not only their own rebirth but also contributed to the ongoing renewal of the god himself. Mythologically, the deceased acted as Horus avenging his father Osiris, and in return, Osiris granted them their rightful reward. It is no coincidence that this vision of the afterlife centers on inheritance and succession, reflecting the social context of the time. The coffin texts emerged in an era dominated by powerful regional governors and echoed their concerns. Like all cultures, the ancient Egyptians projected their everyday realities onto their religious beliefs. The emergence of Osiris from relative obscurity to become the preeminent god of the dead marked a profound transformation in Egypt's religious landscape. As his worship spread across the entire country, Osiris gradually overshadowed many older funerary deities, absorbing their traits and taking over their sacred spaces. In Jeddu, a town located in the central Nile Delta, the people had long revered a local deity named Enjedi, believed to be a once mortal ruler who had been miraculously brought back to life. As the Osiris cult expanded outward from the royal court, it incorporated these compatible local beliefs. Over time, Jeddu evolved into the primary center of Osiris worship in Lower Egypt, while Enjedi faded into obscurity, remembered only as a distant folk figure. A comparable transformation unfolded in southern Egypt, at the town of Abydos. The people there had worshipped a jackal-headed funerary god known as Kentiamenchu, or foremost of the Westerners. This deity, associated with the desert necropolises and the land of the dead in the west, also served as guardian of the burial grounds. Osiris's cult absorbed Kentiamenchu's functions as well. By the time of the 11th dynasty, inscriptions at the temple in Abydos already referred to a merged figure, Osiris Kentiamenchu. Within a few generations, foremost of the Westerners had become nothing more than a title for Osiris, whose dominance was now absolute. Abydos' connection to early royal tombs gave the town an added spiritual significance and a sense of ancient authority. It likely felt natural that Osiris, the quintessential god of resurrection, should be venerated in the very place where Egypt's earliest kings had been laid to rest. Beginning during the era of civil conflict, Abydos rose to become the central hub of the Osiris religion and one of the country's most sacred locations. The destruction of its revered sanctuaries during the strife between the Heracleopolitan and Theban dynasties was deeply shameful to the northern rulers. Their eventual defeat was widely interpreted as divine punishment for committing such a grievous offense. Upon seizing victory, King Mentuhotep II quickly affirmed his religious devotion by renovating the shrine of Osiris Kentiamenchu. His successors continued to support the site, transforming Abydos into a major pilgrimage destination and the stage for elaborate rituals celebrating the resurrection of Osiris. Each year, thousands gathered from across Egypt to witness the mysteries of Osiris, a series of sacred rites dramatizing the god's reign, demise, and return to life. These three aspects of Osiris's myth were enacted through three processions. The first featured the god's cult statue, symbolizing his rule as a living sovereign. Leading the way was a priest portraying Wepwawet, the jackal-headed opener of the ways, heralding the presence of Osiris. The second phase of the ceremony focused on the god's death and burial. The sacred image, housed in an ornate shrine mounted on a ceremonial boat, was carried by priests from the temple to the royal necropolis dating back to Egypt's first dynasty. Along the route, symbolic attacks were staged on the bark shrine to portray the conflict between order and chaos. Other participants acted as Osiris's defenders, warding off these mock aggressors. Though intended as a ritual, this dramatized battle could occasionally escalate into real violence, with intense religious fervor leading to injuries. Passionate devotion has always walked hand in hand with zealotry. The final act celebrated Osiris's resurrection and triumphant return. His image was brought back to the sanctuary, richly cleansed and adorned in splendor. With the ceremonies complete, the assembled crowds dispersed, and peace returned to Abydos. The symbolic power of the Osiris mysteries was so profound that taking part became a lifelong aspiration for many ancient Egyptians. For them, it was comparable to a pilgrimage to Jerusalem or Mecca in later cultures. Yet, for the majority of the population, travel across Egypt was simply not feasible. Even if they could afford the journey, leaving their fields untended for even a short period could result in failed crops and potential ruin. Government officials were in a better position to travel, though they still required formal authorization to leave their administrative duties and make the journey to Abydos, either upstream or downstream. For most people, the most realistic way to partake in the sacred rituals was through representation. If they could arrange for a stela, cenotaph, or any object inscribed with their name to be placed along the route of the great following, they believed they could share in the god's regenerative power as it passed by. This belief led to the transformation of the sacred path leading from Osiris's temple into a prime location for memorial offerings, both modest and grand. The wealthy might commission full statues of themselves, placed within miniature chapels. Those with fewer means might settle for a simple stone tablet, or even a brief inscription on someone else's monument. Regardless of their status, devout Egyptians from all walks of life longed to be associated with the rites. In time, the terrace of the great god became densely populated with memorials, often stacked 5 or 6 layers deep, crowding every bit of space along both sides of the processional path. For those unable to secure any form of representation at Abydos, local festivals in honor of Osiris provided a more accessible alternative. Although these provincial celebrations did not carry the same prestige or spiritual potency, they still offered hope. By reenacting and honoring the resurrection of Osiris in their own cemeteries, priests and common people alike prayed that some measure of divine renewal might bless the souls buried nearby, granting them the promise of everlasting life. Since the earliest days of Egyptian civilization, towns and villages had developed their own religious customs, worshipping different gods and following local traditions, as evidenced by the varied shrines and devotional objects found across the land. But now, for the first time, Egypt appeared to be united under a common religious practice. As the worship of Osiris reached its peak during the Middle Kingdom, the coffin texts began to fall out of use. In their place, a wide array of magical objects emerged, fulfilling similar spiritual roles. These items were designed to help the dead achieve resurrection as Osiris reached the mythical field of offering and accompany Ra on his solar journey. Many of these objects were inspired by everyday life but were reimagined for funerary purposes. Ivory wands, for instance, engraved with images of demons and protective spirits, were commonly used in households to safeguard women during childbirth. These tools were believed to ward off malevolent forces that might endanger the mother or child. In Egyptian thinking, it made perfect sense to include such an object in a tomb, since the reborn soul, like a newborn baby, needed protection from harmful forces. Similarly, fertility figurines once used in domestic rituals to ensure successful childbirth and child-rearing also took on a new function in the tomb, where they symbolized rebirth and spiritual regeneration in the afterlife. Some magical objects found in tombs were created specifically for burial purposes and have no clear counterparts in everyday life, making their interpretation particularly challenging. Among the most iconic of these are small faience models of hedgehogs and hippopotamuses, crafted from a blue-glazed ceramic-like material. Since these items lack inscriptions or associated texts, their intended symbolism remains uncertain, though various plausible interpretations have been proposed. This ambiguity aligns with the inherently layered nature of ancient Egyptian religious beliefs, where multiple, even conflicting, meanings could coexist to strengthen a concept's sacred value. Hedgehogs, for instance, were creatures that burrowed into the earth, possibly seen as natural mediators between the living world and the realm of the dead. When threatened, hedgehogs curl into a ball, resembling the shape of the sun disk, which may have associated them with solar protection and divine energy. Living on the edges of arid deserts, hedgehogs may have symbolized life's persistence against the emptiness of death, making them powerful metaphors in a funerary setting. In contrast, hippopotamuses were creatures of the river, dwelling in the aquatic domain that led toward the mythical field of offering. Known for their strength and aggression, they were thought to be effective protectors against threats. One hippopotamus goddess was also deeply connected with fertility and childbirth. These associations show how a single figure could convey a complex web of meanings reflecting the depth and breadth of Egyptian religious thought. What may seem inconsistent or illogical to modern minds only emphasized, to the Egyptians, the sacred mystery and unknowable nature of the divine. Around the same time these animal figures became common in tombs, another significant funerary object emerged, a small item that exemplifies the Egyptians' creative spirit and practical approach to spiritual concerns. This was the funerary figurine, now found in museums across the globe. Known to the Egyptians as shabdi, these were far more than crude carvings. The shabdi's origin can be traced to the period of internal conflict in Egypt. Lacking access to skilled artisans, elaborate workshops, or tomb decorations, many Egyptians faced a troubling question: if their body was damaged or destroyed, how would their ka survive, and where would the ba return after its nightly journey across the heavens? The solution was both simple and profound: a replacement body. Early versions of this concept were crude. The physical quality of these stand-ins was irrelevant. Magical rituals would compensate for any imperfections once the figure was entombed. Thus began the use of funerary figurines, an inventive response to the instability and insecurity of the time. However, even after Egypt was reunified under King Mentuhotep and the royal courts regained their artistic resources, the tradition endured. With access once again to finely made tomb sculptures and painted burial chambers, at least among the elite, one might have expected the humble shabdi to fall out of use. Instead, its role evolved. Rather than serving as a mere substitute for the body, the Shabti came to represent something equally valuable. With the Osirian concept of the afterlife becoming the dominant belief, the role of the Shabti figurine truly came into focus. The field of offering, while imagined as a paradise of fertile lands and plentiful harvests, still posed a dilemma. Every Egyptian understood that farming required exhausting physical effort. One of the most demanding tasks was the yearly maintenance of the irrigation system after the Nile's flooding. This meant repairing dikes, clearing canals, and transporting heavy baskets of earth from one place to another. Would such labor also be expected in the next life? The thought of toiling forever in the afterlife was hardly appealing. Fortunately, the Egyptians devised a clever solution. The small figurine, originally meant as a replacement body for the deceased, was reimagined. Instead of housing the Ka and Ba, it would now take the deceased's place when summoned for work. Shabtas from the late Middle Kingdom began to appear with tiny farming tools ready to perform agricultural tasks on behalf of their owner. To ensure obedience, each figurine was inscribed with a short hieroglyphic text that served as a command. The message was clear. O Shabti, assign to me, if I am called upon or ordered to do any labor in the afterlife, you shall respond on my behalf, whether it be cultivating the fields, irrigating the banks, or transporting soil from east to west. You shall say, here I am. In this way, the Shabti became an essential safeguard for eternal comfort, a faithful worker ready to serve, ensuring the soul of the deceased could enjoy the blessings of the afterlife without the burdens of toil.